So this is the first time in my life that I've ever had intro music before I speak, so I just want to soak this all up for a second. Yeah, good. It feels good. Awesome. Okay, so thanks everyone for being here. I'm really excited to kind of share with you kind of the agency perspective on things. It's been an awesome day full of great content from the Google side. Hard not to feel just super excited and super inspired about what's coming down the pipeline from Google. So for the afternoon part here, we're going to kind of turn it around and kind of give you a bit of perspective from the agency side. So, as mentioned in the introduction, I've been consulting with Cardinal Path, and it's so funny, by the way, to hear us described as a big company. We definitely don't think of ourselves that way, so it's a good boost to my ego. But I've been with Cardinal Path on and off for about 5.5 years, and again, kind of seen it grow from 9 people when I got there to about 70 people now. And so one of the things I want to share with you, kind of not to plug my own session after the break, but there's really 2 functions in any business that are purely dedicated to growing your business, right? And it's marketing and sales. And so what we want to do is just kind of teach you everything that we've learned and how we've gotten better and sort of matured our business through marketing and sales. We didn't learn this stuff because we're just so smart that we always knew it. We mostly learned this by doing everything wrong the first time and sort of learning from our mistakes. And so when I was looking at the survey data that you all shared with Google and reading about kind of the challenges that you're finding in your business, it was like reading a history of Cardinal Path, and I know kind of all those challenges very well. So everything that we're going to kind of share with you here, it doesn't come from a textbook, it doesn't come from academics, it really just comes from real life and the school of hard knocks, as we call it. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Okay, so the marketing session here, a few things that we're going to talk about. And the really foundational step here is to be able to define your competitive advantage. So what does that mean? Your competitive advantage is what you do better than anyone else in the market, right? And so as we'll see in just a minute, it can be very easy when you talk about your competitive advantage to kind of sink into catchphrases and buzzwords and that sort of thing. So what we want to do is think really critically about what we're actually better at than everybody else. Because your competitive advantage is going to inform things like your messaging, how you build your brand, and then how you take that brand and your messaging and assemble it into all kinds of different sort of marketing collateral, like white papers, videos, solution sheets, all that really nice, high-quality marketing collateral that you want to put out there. Okay, so I always like to start with sort of a bad example, just to give us something to laugh at and make us feel better. So anybody here a fan of The Office, the US version? You recognize Michael Scott a little bit? Yeah, from Dunder Mifflin Paper Company. Probably a lot of us think this kind of reminds us of one of our clients, maybe. But so here's a good way to maybe avoid defining your competitive advantage. I'll just read this out because it starts out pretty good, and then it kind of descends into those cliches and catchphrases. So we design highly innovative, game-changing solutions for the industries we serve every day. Okay, sounds pretty good so far. On time, every time. In the global world in which we all live in, because I believe that children are the future. So I think the hard part here is the first part. That's how we lead with it. Defining your competitive advantage requires you to really be honest with yourself and think critically about your own business to avoid having a competitive advantage that looks like this, right? Okay, so you want to be thinking, what makes us unique? What do we do better than everybody else? Because that's going to inform these next sort of building blocks that you want to start putting together. So think about, what is the actual problem that you solve, right? And there's probably more than one, so you can go through this exercise multiple times, but what is the actual problem that you solve? And then what is the promise that you make, right? So how do you promise to solve that problem? What are the sort of distinguishing benefits of working with your agency as opposed to working with all the other folks that are here in the room that are essentially your competitors to some degree? But you want to take those building blocks and put it together into what we call a USP, or unique selling proposition. You might have heard of sort of a value proposition. Take all those building blocks and put them together, and it looks something like this. So you might have more than one of these that you can fill out, and that's fine, but we think that it's helpful if you have at least one of these. So when you go through this exercise and sort of fill in the blanks, it forces you to be specific about who you are, what problems you solve, what promises you make, and how you're different from your competition, right? It forces you to really think critically about your own business, and it helps you avoid the kind of Michael Scott catchphrases, kind of empty words that define your competitive advantage. So how many people here think, just from a show of hands, they could sort of fill out this card really easily right now. Like they could do it in under 30 seconds. Anybody? How many folks think they could do it if they sat down for 5 minutes and sort of thought through it a little bit? How many people are looking at this and thinking, wow, like we're not really sure what we do, this would be kind of a challenge? Or maybe if you asked 3 people in the company, you'd get 3 very different answers. Anybody feel like that? It's okay if you're there. That's where we were too. So, but again, you might have more than one of these that you can fill out for different customer segments that you serve, different lines of business that you have. That's great, but I think you want to be able to have at least one. So most of us in the room here, we're all sort of pure B2B, our customers, our clients, or other businesses. But I wanted to show just some back from the States, some of the consumer-facing businesses that have done a really good job of kind of boiling down that unique selling proposition. So FedEx is a brand that I think a lot of us are familiar with. And of course, this is a huge company, and they do a lot of B2B work in logistics and supply chain and operations and all that kind of stuff. But they also have a huge consumer business in just shipping packages, right? So I love this kind of encapsulation of what they do, right? So when your package absolutely, positively has to get there overnight. This is that promise that they make to you as the consumer, right? If you're living in a tent in the middle of the Sahara Desert, they will send a caravan of camels with your package, and they will find you in the desert and get you that package overnight, right? That's the promise that they're making. And then here's another brand. This is one that I used to be a customer of probably more than I should. Domino's Pizza. Anybody familiar with Domino's? Anybody eat a Domino's Pizza recently? Yeah, some of us? Okay, so you'll probably get where I'm going with this. So I really like this one as well. You know, fresh, hot pizza delivered to your door in 30 minutes or less, or it's free. So whenever I order this pizza, I would always get out my stopwatch and hope that it would come like 31 minutes late because I'm really hungry, but I also like free pizza. So the interesting thing about Domino's, maybe if you're not familiar with Domino's Pizza, is that their value proposition is not really about the most delicious pizza with a recipe that's designed by master chefs with organic ingredients. That's not who Domino's is, right? The big thing about Domino's, they're almost not even a pizza company. Domino's is a company that will help you not starve in the next 30 minutes, right? We will get you this pizza in 30 minutes, no matter what it takes. We're not gonna promise you that it's like the most tasty, delicious pizza you ever ate, but that's not what Domino's is, right? Domino's will help you avoid starving. That's their mission statement, right? Okay, now depending on the kind of industry that you're in, I found this on the internet, I thought I had to put this up here. And when you're craving unicorn, and we've all been there, right? When you're just craving some unicorn, there's only one place to go, so Radiant Farms, yeah. Okay, but the idea is if you start to think about what makes you unique and who you're trying to serve, it lets you fill out a really useful, what we call a messaging matrix. So this is a little bit of an eye chart. There's kind of a lot up here. So let me just walk through this a little bit. The idea is that you have, as a company, you've got a lot of different stakeholders, right? You have your existing clients. You have prospective clients. You have even your own employees, right? And you want to be able to sort of target each of those different kinds of stakeholders with a really custom, compelling message. So this is a messaging matrix that Cardinal Path we put together for the nonprofit segment. So we actually do a lot of work with major nonprofits in North America. And so you can see here, if you look closely, some of the kinds of messages that we really like to get across to these kinds of organizations. So I'll just read you one. So message number 1, nonprofits that embrace digital marketing strategies are more successful. And then we support that with what we call proof points. So proof points could be things like a case study of our own work with our own clients. They could be third-party research from companies like Forrester or Gartner or Nielsen. But again, nonprofits that embrace digital marketing are more successful. Now, how can we sort of back that up or go a step further? We'll take a look at message number 2. So company name, whoever they are, hopefully Cardinal Path, is the leading authority on digital marketing for the nonprofit sector, right? So tie it all together, message 3, something a bit more specific, improve your web traffic by 1,000% with the NGO Kickstarter program, or whatever we call our consulting practice for nonprofits. So here's the tricky part about this messaging matrix, and I'll highlight it here in just a second. The thing is, so we at Cardinal Path, and I'm sure all of you at your own firms, you kind of think about your company, you think about your brand a certain way. I know a lot of you are like Cardinal Path from reading the survey results and things. A lot of these firms that are in the room started in a garage with 1 person or 2 people or 5 people. Exactly the same story at Cardinal Path. So a lot of cases, your agency is your baby, right? But what that means is that it kind of makes you think about your company perhaps in a different way than your customers or your prospective customers or your employees think about you. So 2 things to be thinking about here. We have this kind of desired brand perception, but we have to make sure that we also understand the actual or the current brand perception. So leaving aside what we think about ourselves, what do our customers think about us, right? What do our prospects think about us? And what do even our employees think about us? And until we understand sort of the difference between how we want to be perceived and how we are perceived, it's very difficult to create the messages in the messaging matrix that will really resonate with these stakeholders. Okay, so figuring out where you stand, I'll just share kind of a personal story with you. So I recently ran my first marathon in March. And that's one of those things, if you know anybody who's ever run a marathon, people who run marathons love to talk about how they're running a marathon. Have you ever noticed that? Maybe it's just me, I don't know. But so when my friends would ask me, it's like, how's that marathon training going? Like, you ever come out to the pub anymore? You're always just running. I was like, oh yeah, it's just really dedicated to this, and I'm just turning into this amazing athlete, like so strong and graceful. But here's the thing. When I completed my marathon, I barely completed it. Like, I'm surprised they didn't call the ambulance to come meet me at the finish line. I'm a data geek, and so when I got home after the marathon and they posted the results online, I was feeling really proud of myself. Like, I'm the next Usain Bolt or something like that. I could be in the Olympics in 4 years. But then I segmented the results, and it turned out that for all the men in my age group, I was second to last in the entire marathon. So, when I think that I look like this amazing athlete, the truth is that I look a little bit more like this, sort of huffing and puffing and barely able to get myself over the finish line. So we want to make sure that we understand not just how you want to be perceived, right? But you have to understand how are you actually perceived, right? When you want to start building your brand, you've got to go from point A to point B. So point A is how do people perceive you now? Point B is how do you want to be perceived, right? So I think at Cardinal Path, we're sort of somewhere in between here. I think we've moved past the dog, but maybe not quite up to the level of the really powerful athlete. Okay, so how do you find out? How do you find out how people perceive you? This is going to sound like a really high-tech, complicated answer, right? You want to know how your clients think about you? Just ask them. You want to know how prospective clients think about you? Just ask them. There's lots of ways you can do this, right? It does not need to be a super high-tech solution. So let me tell you about a few things that we do at Cardinal Path. So one is, and it seems really obvious now, but it took us years to get to this point. Every time we complete an engagement with a client, we send out a standardized customer satisfaction survey to that client, and our account management department sort of follows up with these clients, and we hound them until they submit their feedback to us. What that lets us do is understand what are we doing well, what are we not doing well, or kind of that interesting middle part, which is what are we just not doing as well as maybe our clients expect, or they hoped for, or they wanted when the engagement started, right? So are we getting sort of regular feedback at the end of every engagement? And so finally, we have reached that. The other cool thing that we're doing is we actually have customers on our own advisory board, right? So we have industry thought leaders, and that's all good stuff. We have people who are experienced in the agency world, and now we actually have our own customers on our advisory board to give us the kind of client perspective about how we should be making those big picture decisions at our business. And all kinds of other ways that you can do this, right? Market research firms we talked a little bit about already, and even just little informal things. Like, you'd be very surprised how much feedback you can get out of one of your clients or one of your prospects if you buy them something simple like a Starbucks gift card. It's amazing. Just these little things can help tease out a lot of extra feedback from your existing clients or those prospects that you're trying to win. Okay, so that's how you figure out kind of your current brand perception. What's the desired perception? Well, the answer to this is that it kind of depends on who you are, what market segment you're trying to serve, who you want to be. So we'll just tell you a bit about kind of Cardinal Path. So, the most basic thing, if nothing else, we want to be a trusted advisor, right? So we want there to be just complete and fundamental trust at the foundation of all of our relationships with our clients. We think that's just sort of the prerequisite to building our business and to building really long-term partnerships with our clients. So being a trusted advisor. That's just step one, though, right? The next thing is we want to make sure that we really reflect that subject matter expertise. So we want to be, true digital marketing counsel. And then we want our clients to actually talk about us with these kind of terms. Like, we want people to think, the reason I'm more successful than my competition is that we work with Cardinal Path. That's kind of our aspiration. That's what we want people to be saying about us. And so going beyond just subject matter expert to secret weapon, right? Cutting edge, indispensable, right? Dependable, proactive, all these good things. So going beyond just kind of having subject matter expertise and getting literally to the point where clients say, the reason I'm successful is that I work with Cardinal Path. Okay, so you figured out kind of how do people think about your brand right now? You've thought about how would I like my brand to be perceived? So now it's time to go build that. And so what we did is we kind of looked at our own history, our own evolution, and came up with sort of 10 steps to start with. And I think the hardest one is the first one, so we'll just get it out of the way first. There's a lot of people in the room here that do a lot of similar things, that offer a lot of similar services, right? It's a competitive market, as we've seen throughout the day. So really think critically, think deeply, think honestly about what makes you unique, and that's going to be the foundation of how you build your brand, right? So what's actually unique about you? And again, I can't stress this enough. Think critically, like really push the envelope there and ask yourself, does that actually make me unique? Am I really unique in that way? Because if you are, these next steps will flow pretty naturally. So building up a community, right? In this room, we're not all massive sort of consumer-facing brands. We're not selling laundry soap. We're not selling packaged goods. So the world out there, in terms of prospective clients and our actual clients, it isn't all that big, which means that community can be a really vibrant thing. It can be a lot more than just a buzzword. So at Cardinal Path, we are very active on social media. We tweet links to our webinars and all those kinds of things that you would expect. But being active on social media goes a lot farther than just sort of self-promotion. If you look at some of the original like Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager communities on Google+, we actually moderate those. So I think what this shows is that this is not pay for play. This is not sort of a thinly veiled advertising. This is an actual community where people get answers to their really important questions, and we're helping to moderate and contribute to that community. Right? Okay, next one. This is going to sound again possibly obvious, but do great work. And the reason for this is sort of twofold. The first thing is that people love to share their experiences, right? So if you have an amazing experience working with a consulting firm, right, you're going to want to tell all your kind of coworkers, tell your industry peers about that experience. You're going to get things like word of mouth, right? Really invaluable sort of marketing power there. You're going to get things like referrals. But the flip side is that if you don't do great work, and not necessarily even bad work, but if you just don't do work that lives up to the expectations, guess what? People want to share those experiences as well, right? So if you don't live up to expectations, right, people are going to hear about that as well, and all of a sudden that great sort of word of mouth and those referrals are going to dry up, right? So, if nothing else, at least do great work. Okay, now here's a fun one. Again, I'm going to show you some examples of sort of how to not do it so that we all feel good about ourselves. But these are going to amaze you, I think. So create a strong logo. It sounds easy enough, but I think we've all seen these kinds of companies. Maybe some of you are thinking, hey, this looks like my client's logo, where it looks like somebody made this in Microsoft Paint, and frankly, isn't even that good at Microsoft Paint, right? So we want to avoid logos that look kind of like this. The other thing is, you want to be really careful about kind of the images that you use. I did not make these up. These are real logos. And one of these, I'm not gonna name any names. One of these is a client that we've actually worked with. So, it's amazing when you see these kinds of logos. Like, who wants to go to the dentist and get punched in the face, if that's even what that is? And then you've got things like drowning LOL. I don't know if that's really a polite way to think about it. So, don't make your logo look like something that a 12-year-old built in MS Paint. And then again, sort of be careful with be careful with your imagery. Okay. The other thing is discover your voice. So what I like about this example is the Hans Brinker sort of low-budget hotel in Amsterdam. Some of you may be familiar with this hotel. What I like about this is that this is a budget hotel, and they don't try to convince you that they're not, right? They don't try to dance around the fact that this is a very cheap hotel. They embraced that, and they really found a unique voice. So take a look at some of these messages, right? The Hans Brinker budget hotel. It can't get any worse, but we'll do our best, right? Our maids work twice as hard because we only have one, right? Free wireless if you get the neighbor's password. So I like this, right? They kind of know who their market is, and they don't try to lie to you about it, right? This is a cheap hotel. They're not going to promise you that they're the Ritz-Carlton, right? They're not going to try to do a big song and dance and sort of avoid who they really are. Instead, they embrace who they are. So think about kind of a unique voice that you can bring to your marketing. Okay, the next one is kind of near and dear to my heart. So I actually live right outside Detroit in the US, which, as many of you probably know, traditionally kind of the heart of the American auto industry. So GM, Ford, Chrysler, a lot of really big American iconic brands. And as you probably also know, most of these companies have had a pretty bad last 30, 40 years, right? It's been a bit of a rough go in Detroit. And so I'm not going to show you the videos here just to stay on schedule a bit, but there's been some really amazing ad campaigns in the last few years, put out by Chrysler specifically. Their kind of tagline is called "Imported from Detroit." I encourage you guys that have done ads in the Super Bowl. If you're curious, take a look at some of their YouTube videos and things. Really like compelling campaigns. I'm kind of a cynical person. I don't tend to get sort of emotional with brands and that sort of thing. But I have to say, the Chrysler advertising has been just really compelling for a long time. But all it takes is sort of one intern with access to the wrong Twitter account to kind of blow this up, right? So you have these amazing messages like "Imported from Detroit," "This is the Motor City, and this is what we do," kind of the American eagle icon here. And then, someone with the Twitter account, like a summer intern, posts something like this, right? And it really kind of undermines this message, right? So I'm not going to read this just to keep the video appropriate for all audiences, but we can all read this. And what you can see is that this kind of message that tries to be funny really falls on its face, because that's not kind of what this branding is about, right? So Detroit is trying to portray this really serious image of a comeback, and then this kind of almost makes fun of it, right? So be consistent with your message, and don't hire interns who are going to do things like this, okay? Okay, keep your promises. This can be a little bit of a tricky one. So again, on the surface, it sounds like, of course I would keep my promises. I wouldn't lie to my customers. But I'll tell you where this becomes challenging, right? Let me get a show of hands. How many times have you been in a situation with a client where you feel like you delivered what you promised, right? You feel like you've done exactly what you promised you were going to do, you've done it on schedule, you've done a good job, and then it turns out that you actually had some kind of miscommunication or misunderstanding with the client. They thought the scope of the project was one thing, you thought it was kind of another thing. Have we all had that kind of experience? Is it just me? Show of hands. Okay, yeah, okay, it's everyone. Good, not just us. So here's what we found is that it can be tempting to say, hey, you know what, client, we did exactly what we said we were going to do, and if you don't like it, you can just pay us some more, and then we'll do what you thought we could do. I think we've all probably felt that temptation. Maybe we don't say it so bluntly to the client. Hopefully we don't. But there's that temptation, right? But we want to avoid clients that behave like this, right? Seeing a grown man cry in a conference room is just not a place that you want to be. And so what we found is that you have to kind of resist that temptation to be right and to sort of have the client admit that you're right. And instead, sometimes you have to go over budget, right? Sometimes you have to go over the timeline to kind of go above and beyond to meet the promises. Not because you didn't deliver on the promises, but because you had that communication gap or that scoping issue with a client, right? So at the end of the day, what you've promised to do is really what the client thinks you've promised to do. Right now, of course, there's a little bit of wiggle room there. If they're just being ridiculous, maybe you should send them another invoice or something like that. But when it's reasonable, we try to kind of go that extra mile and make sure that we're not just delivering what we thought we promised, but really what the client thinks that we promised. Right? So keep your promises. Okay, I mentioned kind of, I'm sort of a cynical guy, and I don't always get emotional with how brands are trying to communicate with me. Same thing goes for like mission statements and corporate values. I'm one of those people that I usually have a hard time getting really enthusiastic about that. Probably some of you feel the same way. But Cardinal Path, for those of you who don't know, was actually the merger of 3 very small agencies that came together, 2 in Canada and 1 in the US. And so when we merged, one of the things that was really good, and at the time, I didn't even appreciate this, but now 5 years later, I really can. We sat down and we actually thought about, is Cardinal Path just sort of the average of these 3 firms that have merged, or is Cardinal Path actually going to be something different? And if so, what do we want Cardinal Path to be? So we actually sat down, we call this our purpose statement. And so what you see here is our dream, and it says to know, to share, and then again, to actually be our partner's competitive advantage. That's our aspiration for ourselves. And then you can see we've got kind of listed out some of our core beliefs, our focus, our spirit, and our attributes. And what I like about this is that a lot of times these kind of mission statements, these corporate values, they become something that your employees just put on a shelf and they never think about. It feels like empty buzzwords. But the cool thing at Cardinal Path is that I think from the senior-most leadership on down, we really kind of live this out and we work this into all of our marketing. So I'll show you a bunch of examples here. But our Google Plus page, right? Our subtitle here, Empowering Confident Decisions, right? That's actually our explicitly stated company focus, right? That's what we do. And this works its way into all of our blogging and our partnerships and our writing and all the case studies that we do, right? So data is the raw material of our craft, one of our core beliefs. That's not just an empty buzzword, right? We work that into sort of everything that we say to the public, right? Okay, and then keep in mind that as you're building your brand, you have some control over your brand, but you don't have total control over your brand. And so I'll just kind of compare and contrast with you two companies that I'm sure you've heard of. Apple, I know you've heard of. Apple is a company that has legions of loyal followers, right? People who are incredibly brand loyal to Apple. The kind of brand loyalty that makes other companies incredibly jealous, right? Incredibly envious. Almost no one that you can think of has the kind of brand loyalty that Apple does. People want to shave the logo right into their hair, get it tattooed on their chest. We'll actually even tape a physical apple onto our laptop. Yeah. I love Google image search, by the way. It's very helpful for building slides. And what's funny about this, and I don't want to dwell on the topic too much, but this is a company that has a lot of interesting questions that are being raised about it, like labor practices and these kinds of things. Now, here's another company that you've heard of, and it has some of the same kind of high-level issues, right? How do they treat their workers? How much do they pay their workers? And yet, think about the way that Walmart's brand is sort of perceived by outsiders, right? Compared to the way that Apple's brand is perceived. Now, this is actually, I actually live in Wayne County. I wish I was there to see it, but apparently a woman was glued to the toilet. But this is just the kind of thing that Walmart just seems to fall into, right? It's not their fault. But think about what that says, right, about Apple's brand versus Walmart's brand, right? We expect to see Walmart sort of made fun of this way, at least Americans do. And there's a reason for that, right? Which is that you don't have total control over your brand. Okay, and then a big one, definitely a lesson that us at Cardinal Path have really learned the hard way. This is the kind of lesson that's probably taken us way longer to learn than it should have, so hopefully we can speed up the learning curve for you. But this is just to keep your focus. So at Cardinal Path, our core business is that we are an analytics consulting firm. We do a lot of SEM because it's a very natural kind of next step. We do a lot of training. And there are a lot of other kinds of businesses that we used to be in that we're not in anymore because we either couldn't do it as well as we do our core job, we couldn't make it scale. But what's tempting, and I wonder if you felt this way, is that when you're a really small agency, when a prospective client comes to you and says, hey, we have some money and we'd like to give it to you because we think you can help us with this problem, I think you probably have all felt that temptation of yes, I will do whatever you say. If you tell me to jump, I will ask you, how high should I jump, right? Because, oh my gosh, this client's going to give me money. It's amazing. And so we did that all the time. We got sucked into projects that we really had no business doing, that weren't our core expertise. For some reason, a client thought that we would do a good job, so we assumed, well, if they think we could do a good job, I'm sure we can figure it out. These are actual conversations that I've overheard in the Cardinal Path office. It was that bad. So keep your focus, right? That doesn't mean that you shouldn't experiment and try to learn new things. But again, when you get presented with the opportunity to take on new work, just ask yourself, is this actually what we're excellent at, or is this maybe a better fit for a different kind of agency, right? So just keep your focus. So to sum this up, right, sort of three things. You want to make sure that as you build your brand, you stick to these three kind of major principles that work for us. Do you deliver value, right, in every project that you do? Do you deliver on your promises, and do you do it consistently? Again, every project. Okay, so you go through those exercises to kind of build up what you want your brand to be. Now it's time to kind of take that work and really blow it out across all these interesting kinds of sort of different marketing collateral that you can build. So the first thing here is I'm kind of curious, how many agencies here have a formal style guide for their agency? Anybody? Yeah, okay, a few of us. So a style guide does a few different things. It really helps all your employees across the entire agency understand, how should your logo be presented? What's your kind of color scheme and things like that? What's nice about this is that it really helps kind of all of your documents, all of your spreadsheets, all of your presentations have that really nice, consistent, professional look and feel. So if you don't feel like you can design a style guide for yourself, that's totally fine. But hire someone out that can do a really nice job for you, right? I think it's almost, if you can't do this really nicely and professionally, just wait until you can, right? A sloppy style guide is almost worse than no style guide, which again, we learned the hard way. So a style guide is great. It standardizes our work our clients know that no matter who they're working with on an individual basis, right, no matter which consultant they're working with, they're going to get that same kind of look and feel in all of the materials that we give them. Okay. The next thing is, don't forget, right? Your website is your storefront. We talked about, how I think of myself as a runner compared to the dog that can barely get over the finish line. Sometimes we have this issue of how we think about our website as well. So again, to start off with how to not do it, I'm just going to leave this up here until somebody laughs. Took me a few minutes to get this. I'm a very innocent-minded person. Okay, so again, be careful with your visuals. This is sort of what your homepage looks like, or the first thing that people see. I don't think a lot of people are going to be booking rooms at this hotel, for example. And then, for example, if you sell web design, you should probably have a pretty nice, snappy-looking website, right? Would you buy a haircut from this person? Right? Probably not. You might at least do some comparison shopping before you do that. So don't forget, you never get a second chance to make a first impression, and your website is really oftentimes when you make that first impression. Okay, so your marketing collateral can take all kinds of different forms, and what you see here is that we try to be consistent. Although we have lots of different types of marketing materials that we're putting out, we try to be consistent. So we always have kind of this standard about Cardinal Path, right? Even though, again, in the very generous introduction, we were described as, I think, the biggest analytics agency. That might be true, but we're still a really small company. And so we know that a lot of people have never heard of us before, right? So it's really important that we stay consistent, whether we're doing blog posts or white papers or webinars or trade shows, that this kind of about Cardinal Path messaging should have that same message no matter what kind of format we're talking about. Okay, Creds deck. This is short for credentials deck. This is oftentimes what you're going to use in sort of an initial sales pitch or like a meet and greet type of meeting with a prospective client. This is kind of talking about who you are and why you're so great. And one of the things that has really helped us at Cardinal Path is not just to have a Creds deck, but also to have like senior folks within the company record themselves presenting the Creds deck so that, for example, new hires, when they come in the front door and start working for us, they can watch this as part of their orientation and really understand not just kind of what we do, but also how we talk about what we do, which I think is really important, right? So a Creds deck is a great thing, and don't forget to record this, kind of get that gold standard so that everybody else in the agency can really understand how you want to be communicating to your clients. Okay, another thing, again, this took us way too long to figure out. This might seem super obvious, but take a little bit of money and just invest in getting some really nice like photos of all your staff, write up some good standardized bios. We've now made this part of our kind of new hire onboarding process so that when they get a new laptop and they get their email address and their password, we also get a headshot, like a nice bio picture, and we actually get a bit of their kind of career experience written down on paper so that we can take these kind of information and send it out to clients, put it in proposals, put it on our website, whatever the case may be. It's kind of a small investment and it sounds like a little thing, but you're going to get a lot of juice out of this, right? You can use this in so many ways, right? So client presentations, blog posts, social media, advertising, all kinds of different ways that you can kind of get a good return on this investment. So again, simple ways that you can kind of make yourself, make your marketing practice just that much more professional, right? Okay, so that's bios and photos. All right, so I want to spend some time talking about case studies. So case studies is probably, if I was going to pick one form of collateral that I would say is the most important for you, I think this might be it. Because everyone out there that you compete with can say a lot of the same things, right? Like, we're the cheapest, or we're the best, or we have the best people, or whatever the case may be. Anybody can say that, right? And in fact, everyone does. So where's the proof, right? How do you actually prove out that what you're saying is true, right? How do you show your clients as opposed to just telling them that you're the best, right? And so case studies are a big thing. A lot of times you can sort of write this into a contract. It's a great way to get it. So that at the end of an engagement and the client's really happy, next step is you get into that case study. So we've really invested in trying to get a lot more of these case studies on our site. For a long time, we had like 2 case studies and they were like 3.5 years old and they were talking about like old versions of Google Analytics, and it was one of those things we just got embarrassed and we had to do something about it. And so what we've been able to do now is really commit to this, and we've got nice, fresh, exciting case studies coming out all the time. Similar to a case study, things like white papers and ebooks, what I like about these is that in addition to kind of showing that you have the credentials, that you can do the work, which is kind of what a case study does, White papers and ebooks show a little bit of a different flavor, which is not only do you have the skills that it takes to compete in this industry, you're the thought leaders that are actually shaping the industry day to day, right? So putting out these kind of white papers and ebooks, it's a great form of marketing because even if people download your white paper and learn a lot about Google Analytics, they learn a lot about Google Tag Manager or DBM or whatever the case might be, and they never call you, that's okay, right? They still learn something. This marketing still has some inherent value. But as you can imagine, because it's valuable, it, again, really establishes your credibility and shows that you're actually shaping this industry from one day to the next. Webinars. This is a really cool way to do the same kind of really informative, valuable marketing, but in a much more interactive format. Has anybody done these kinds of webinars before? Sort of marketing webinars for their clients? So this is kind of a newer thing for us, but we're finding that it's working really, really well. And in particular, the thing that we've tried to do is do webinars that are not just with Cardinal Path folks, because that feels like just yelling into a megaphone, right? Yelling into a microphone. So what we've tried to do is one of two things. One is partner up with industry partners, or what seems to work really well is to do webinars with our own clients, right? So after the end of a, hopefully, a successful engagement, people feel good about Cardinal Path, we bring them in and do a webinar with them. Seems to work really well, and having the client perspective, I think really shows our prospective clients that this is not just a thinly veiled kind of advertisement, but that they're really hearing what it's like to work with Cardinal Path, what were the big successes. Okay, so lots of different formats here that we've talked about. I'd say one of the things that we figured out was these work really well, but then we kind of started getting stretched too thin, and we were just trying to do as many as possible. That also isn't necessarily the right approach we found. So what we're trying to do now is really focus on just do a few of these and focus more on doing them really well. So put out a really high quality product, and you won't have to put out so many of these, right? So just do a few, do them well. Repurpose them as many ways as you can. So if you publish a white paper about programmatic media buying, you can turn that into an 8-part blog series on your blog, right? Which has a lot of really good value as well. So chop these up, repurpose them, recycle them, turn them into as many different formats as you can. Okay, partner up. We talked about this with webinars, but sort of leverage your partners. And take all this great content and put it into sort of an internal library. So how many folks here have some kind of internal website, like an intranet, that their employees can use? Anybody? Yeah, a few of us. So we have one. It's nothing fancy, as you can see here. It's really basic. It's not the most beautiful thing, but it's very functional. And we put all of this material that we've invested all this time and effort and money on our intranet so that all of our employees, all 70 of them, can access this and be able to share it with their clients, use it in sales pitches that they're involved in, all that good stuff. The other thing is that while a lot of this marketing, the reason that we create it is to share it with prospective clients, this is actually great material to share with existing clients as well. And we call that sort of gift giving. So we don't give our clients gifts of money. We don't bribe them to stay with us. But if we have clients where the project has kind of slowed down or things are getting a bit more routine, we'll kind of give them a gift of knowledge, right? Send them our latest case study, send them our latest white paper, whatever the case might be, right? Okay, so lots of different ways that you can use all this marketing collateral. The other thing is we talked a bit about sort of being active on social media. In our world, it is kind of a small, interactive, close-knit community. And so you really can get a lot of good leverage out of social media. And so we don't do this in a really sophisticated way, just being totally honest. The way that we do our social media, tweeting our webinars and our training events and all this kind of stuff, is that we have someone who sends out an email every week and kind of splits up the company into Group A and Group B. I think I'm in Group B, I'm not sure. And so I get different links that I should tweet or put on LinkedIn or put on the Google Plus GA community or whatever the case might be, right? So it's, again, does not have to be some kind of really sophisticated approach here. It can be very basic. And indeed, it does for us. But what's nice about this is that this is something that's structured, it's something that's scheduled, and it's something that, again, at the highest levels of the company is demonstrably taken seriously so that that kind of permeates throughout the entire organization and everyone takes it seriously because of that. Okay, so this is kind of a marketing content calendar, and this can seem really basic, but I have to tell you, you've seen a lot of good stuff up here. You've seen a lot of great ways to put out really nice marketing collateral, a style guide that helps you do that in a really kind of professional, consistent way. But the thing is, if you're going to rely on kind of finding the free time to write that white paper, if you're relying on maybe, hey, on Saturday, instead of spending time with my kids or spending time with my friends, I'll design a new webinar, what you'll notice is that this stuff never gets done. And it just kind of perpetually seems like a really good idea that you'll get to when you can, but guess what? You never do, right? Has anybody had that experience? That was us for about a year. Yeah. So we did like one webinar, and we were like, wow, it's really great. We should do more. And then for like a year, we didn't do any more because we hadn't actually calendared this out. So now what we do is, again, thinking about a structured approach, this is all like firmly on the schedule. And this is part of things like performance reviews, right? So if I don't publish a certain number of blog posts every quarter, I'm going to hear about it at the end of the quarter when my boss gives me my performance review, right? So we've taken it to that level where it's very serious. It's no longer a nice to have, right? And it's actually a must do, right? And so by putting this into the calendar, and we do this for the entire year. So at the end of 2014, we sat down as a leadership team at Cardinal Path and thought about what are the big picture topics that we really want to invest in 2015. And we built out this calendar. I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but we built out this calendar for the entire calendar year of 2015, month by month, person by person within the company. What are the kinds of things that we're going to be posting on? What are the kinds of topics that we really want to put out case studies in? And all of that. And it's in the calendar. It's part of your day job. It's not a nice to have. It's not something to get to in your free time. It's very seriously part of your job. And so, again, this sounds, maybe it sounds kind of obvious when you hear it from somebody up here on the stage, but until you make this leap, or until we made this leap anyway, we weren't fulfilling the potential that this kind of marketing really represents. So I encourage you all to think about what are the kinds of areas that you have the most expertise? What are the kinds of messages that you want to be kind of conveying that thought leadership to your clients and your prospective clients? And put that in the calendar and just do it. I don't know how else to say it, but again, if you rely on doing it in your free time, I suspect that you will not actually end up doing all that much of it. Okay, so we'll have a case study here in just a couple of minutes from Visibility Agency in Slovakia and here in the Czech Republic about this kind of inbound marketing and putting out all these kinds of white papers and ebooks and some of the results that they saw. So I think you're going to be interested. If you don't want to take my word for it, you could take their word for it. But before I wrap up, I just want to give kind of one little caveat or one thing to be thinking about as you move forward with this, and that is QA, quality assurance, quality control, is really important. So, again, we wanted to show you that we're not perfect. We learned all this stuff the hard way, and I can show you examples of our mistakes. So for any of you folks who know about tag management, you can probably already see the mistake on this screen. So here we did a webinar about Adobe's tag management system, which is the biggest competitor to Google's tag management system. And what we did here was we made a very, very silly mistake that really anybody at Cardinal Path should have been able to see. Does anybody see the mistake here? Is anybody laughing at us a little bit? Yeah, fair enough. We put this headline up here, Introduction to Adobe Tag Management, and then we put the Google Tag Manager logo right underneath that. So you would think that at Cardinal Path, somebody would have caught that somewhere, but it just goes to show that a little bit of QA can go a long way. What was really funny about this is that it kind of made everyone angry, right? Adobe got mad at us, Google got mad at us. Fortunately, we fixed this within a few hours, but we kind of made everyone mad, and that's not what we want to do. But this can happen to anybody. I just want to show you one of these here. This is real, as far as I understand it. This is not a joke. So invest in QA, work it into your process. And just to go back for 1 second here, we talked about the marketing calendar and scheduling all this content. Don't forget, QA, editorial review, should be part of this calendar. So put the time in there, make it an official part of the process, because if you don't take QA seriously, you end up with kind of silly mistakes like this or more serious mistakes like this. So hopefully nobody here is going to do something quite this serious. But with that, thank you very much. We'll transition into the case study. Yeah, thank you.